Now, over the years, Donald Trump, of course, has delivered many public speeches, but yesterday's address following the attack on the U.S. forces has to be one of his most anticipated ones. The entire world was forced to wait for hours before the president finally gave his thoughts, but it wasn't the normally combative Trump that we saw yesterday. It was a much more restrained President Trump. Now, what exactly was the implication of this and the importance of some of the aspects of his speech? The biggest takeaway has been the de-escalation. He said that Iran was, quote-unquote, standing down. This is in the backdrop of the daring and direct attack by Iran. He declared that no U.S. or Iraqi forces were killed and tried to spin the narrative to claim victory. Then there was the expected rant against Soleimani. Trump reiterated that Soleimani had American and Iraqi blood on his hands. And according to the president, Soleimani was personally responsible for some of the worst anti-U.S. atrocities. He also took a jibe at Barack Obama, saying that the missiles used by the Iranians were paid for by the funds released by the former administration. Trump has consistently come down heavily on Obama's foreign policy. You can't separate the politician and the statesman in Donald Trump. As evident yesterday, he made a re-election pitch during his speech, saying Iran would never have a nuclear weapon as long as he was president. And then there was a message for his allies as well. He asked Europeans to leave the nuclear deal so that a new one could be negotiated, and asked NATO to get more involved in West Asia. The NATO chief has had similar sentiments about the issue. But many are calling Trump's speech incoherent, and that there is no clear messaging in what it said. We have identified three things that were missing in his speech. The first omission was a welcome one: retaliation. He boasted of America's military prowess but did not threaten to use it on Iran. There were no threats of attacking cultural sites or promises of fire and fury. Iraq was largely missing in his speech. The attack happened on Iraqi soil, and its parliament and prime minister both want U.S. troops out of the country, yet he mentioned Iraq only thrice, and that only to say that there was no Iraqi casualty. And lastly, what exactly is Trump's strategy here? Will the U.S. troops remain in West Asia? Trump said that he wants to get the U.S. out of West Asia as soon as possible, but in the same breath asked for NATO to be more involved. The NATO, of course, is being led by the U.S. The one thing Trump was very certain about was sanctions. The U.S. will immediately impose sanctions that he described as punishing. But Iran is already heavily sanctioned. Most industries and even the sovereign fund is subject to sanctions. But sources in the U.S. Treasury have hinted at a metal sector sanction as well. The metal industry employs close to 50,000 people in Iran, and it earns nearly $4 billion every year through exports. More than 24 hours after Iran's strike, what is the situation on the ground? There are some encouraging signs. One, an influential Shia cleric in Iraq, Muqtada al-Sadr, has urged the militia to not carry out any attacks on U.S. assets. It's important to note here that the al-Sadr is a nationalist who has positioned himself against both Iran and U.S. in Iraq. The Vice President of U.S., Mike Pence, also had some positive information. He said the U.S. was receiving intelligence reports from Iran that seemed to indicate that Tehran was asking its militia to back down. And well, Daniele Pagani, our West Asia Bureau Chief, is now joining us live for the latest on the messaging there from Donald Trump's speech. And clearly, Daniele, it was much more restrained, less combative than it ever has been. This is the best case scenario for America to pull back from this escalation.
Definitely, yes. And not only that, it is also, so to say, a victory in terms of image and in terms of propaganda. Why so? At the end of the day, the American army managed to take down an Iranian general, one of the top commanders of the Iranian regular forces, a man who was actually overseeing the entire extraterritorial operation throughout the West Asian region. That's a very big blow when it comes to Iranian strategy in the region. In response, Iran did fire several cruise missiles, several several ballistic missiles against 2 bases where U.S. forces were in Iraq, but there were no casualties. So at the end of the day, there was no real damage to the American presence in the region. It was largely, so to say, uncovered attack. In fact, Americans had the intelligence to understand that the attack was coming and ask their troops to back down and to take protection, and this is exactly what happened. So not only this is the best case scenario for the region, at least for now, but also this is the best case scenario for Washington that comes out victorious from this dispute, having shown that its deterrent still works, and that Iran at the end of the day did, so to say, a symbolic action. Clearly an action which would have been much worse without American intelligence, but Washington knew that it could spot an attack before it started from Tehran.
Right, and of course it was rightly aided by Iraq in that intelligence on those US bases. But Daniele, of course, as you said, an achievement for the Trump administration in a way, also of course removing all of Obama's legacy. But going back to the point of negotiations going forward, Trump has spoken about, talking hard negotiations involving the NATO in it. Do you think that this is going to restart a new set of dialogues with a new set of conditions from both sides, possibly more, of course, from the Americans?
It doesn't really look like a possibility, at least in the short time. Why so? Iran has launched retaliation, and as I said, it was not a really victorious retaliation, at least in terms of image and power propaganda. Hence, if now Iran decides to get back to the negotiating table, whoever is concerned, whoever is involved, be it the NATO, be it the European Union, be it Turkey, be it any of the actors who could mediate between Washington and Tehran, it will show an image of even more weakness, which is something that it doesn't want to do. Perhaps Iran is way more keen to find out other ways to retaliate. Fortunately, we are having, as you correctly pointed out, information about the fact that Tehran is requesting the Shia militias based in Iraq to back down, not to take any military action. But this does not suggest that negotiations are possible, at least at this point of time. So I would say no, there is no chance that in the short term we would see another negotiation round for the nuclear deal, for instance, or for any other deal that possibly can be struck between Washington and Tehran.
Right. All right, Daniel. Thanks very much indeed for joining us with the latest there. No room for negotiation yet, and of course backing down from both sides, and a victory for the Trump administration at the moment. Thanks very much indeed for that.